life is easy when you're up on the mountain. You've got peace of mind like you've never known. But then things change and you're down in the valley. Don't lose faith, for you're never alone. For the God on the mountain is still God in the valley. When things go wrong, He'll make them right. And the God of the good times is still God of the bad times. The God of the day is still God of the night. You talk of faith when you're up on the mountain. The talk comes easy when life's at its best. It's down in the valley of trials and temptations. That's when faith is really put to the test. For the God on the mountain is still God in the valley. When things go wrong, He'll make them right. And the God of the good times is the God of the bad times. The God of the day is still God of the night. The God of the day is still God of the night.
Thank you. That was a perfect song for our message today. And Hiram, this message that I'm delivering today had you in mind. I remember a few months ago, earlier this year, going hiking with you and a group from the church. And so I had you in mind as I prepared this message. And I have something to give you at the end. So pay attention so you won't miss what I have to give you. Let's bow our heads for an added word of prayer, shall we? Oh God in heaven, I pray that you will speak through your messenger today. I pray that you will give a message for each one of us personally here in your house today. In Jesus' name, amen. Lessons from the mountain. I'm going to ask Glenn if he'll put a picture on the screen. From the time I was a child, I've had a very keen interest in mountains, in mountain climbing, in mountain hiking. And I know where this began. It began where I was growing up in the mission field in Africa, in Kenya. In fact, from the mission station where I grew up, on a very clear day, we could see Mount Kilimanjaro from the mission. Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest mountain in Africa and one of the most romantic mountains of the world. It has a distinction of being the highest mountain from the surrounding plain to the top. There is no other mountain that has such an incredible rise from base to top. The base of the mountain is about 5,000 feet, and the top of the mountain is about 20,000 feet. It's an incredible experience to go up Mount Kilimanjaro. And so from the time of a young child, it was my dream, my ambition my hope to someday climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I've read many books about mountain climbing. Many authors have written about the life lessons that we can learn from mountain climbing, business lessons that can be learned. Many leadership gurus study mountain climbing and experience mountain climbing for the lessons that it gives them in leadership. In fact, there is this strange, unexplainable call of the mountain that many people experience. The mountains just seem to beckon to us to conquer, to climb, to summit the world's mountains. Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to summit Mount Everest from Australia, Sir Edmund Hillary said, "The reason I climb is because the mountain is there." He said, "The reason I climbed Everest was because it was there." Mountain climbing is really a challenge, a major challenge. And mountain climbing can be related to our personal life in many ways, to our relationships, to our own challenges in life. We often face challenges that are like mountains to us that we must rise above. In fact, life is a mountain. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro twice. The first time I climbed, I was with a small group, and I'll never forget what I experienced near the base of the mountain. Near the base of the mountain, you go from savanna grassland to a rainforest. In fact, there are 5 climate zones on Mount Kilimanjaro. And in the rainforest, it's dense, it's dark, it's damp. And I remember walking on the trail. I was ahead of the group. I was competitive. In mountain climbing, I was very competitive. And so I was running and walking fast through the rainforest ahead of the group. And suddenly I heard these ear-splitting sounds. And I thought, well, it was a monkey or some wild animal. It definitely was a wild animal. But the closer I got to it, the louder it became. And I realized what it was, crashing through the forest, breaking branches and leaves flying. And it was coming right toward me. It was an elephant. And I was there face to face with an elephant with no protection between me and the elephant. So I ran faster and I sent up a prayer for deliverance. And of course, I made it. I survived. It's interesting that there are stories in the Bible of people and their encounters with animals, with wild beasts. And so what I want to show today is Bible lessons regarding mountain climbing, how mountain climbing is related to the lessons God gives in the Bible. And so the first is Genesis 37. Turn with me to Genesis 37, and we'll read one verse there. Genesis 37 and verse 33. It says, "And he knew it and said, 'It is my son's coat.'" This is Jacob, when his sons brought the blood-soaked coat of Joseph to their father. And the father said, Jacob said, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces." And so here is a grieving father just hearing the word, hearing the news that his son Joseph has been mauled by an animal and killed by this wild beast. There's another passage in the Bible that reminds us of people encountering wild beasts, and that's in Daniel. You know the story of Daniel in the lion's den. And so we'll read Daniel 6, verse 22. Daniel 6, verse 22. Seems like someone moved it, but here we go. Daniel 6:22, and it says, "My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt." And so here we hear the account of Daniel surviving the lion's den, and he gives credit to God. God was the one that spared him from the lion. God spared me from the elephant that day. The group behind me also heard the elephant, so I wasn't imagining it. They saw the elephant not too far away in the rainforest. And so we continued our climb up Kilimanjaro. Actually, Kilimanjaro is not considered mountain climbing or mountaineering. It's considered a hike, a very strenuous, very ambitious hike, but it's not at the level of mountaineering. Then the first night on the mountain, we had 5 nights on Kilimanjaro in our ascent up the mountain. The first night we spent in a cave. It was a huge cave, a lava cave, because Kilimanjaro is an extinct volcano. And there were 22 in our group, along with 15 porters and a guide. So it was a large group, but there was room for all of us in this cave and our gear. It was a large cave, a volcanic cave. And we actually spent the Sabbath there. We stayed 2 nights in the cave and enjoyed Sabbath worship and Sabbath rest right there at the cave on the side of Kilimanjaro. I'd like us to turn to 1 Samuel. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 22, and we will look at verse 1. 1 Samuel 22 and verse 1. Here we encounter the story of David and his family hiding out in a cave. His family came to see him, and David was in a cave, and the family joined him there in the cave. Look at 1 Samuel 22, verse 1. David, therefore, departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard, they went down thither to him. And so David and his 400 men, plus his family, in the cave of Adullam. I've had many wonderful trips to the Holy Land, but I've never seen the cave of Adullam. I would love to see that cave someday. And so we had a wonderful experience in that cave on Kilimanjaro. The next day, Sunday morning, we started out early, climbing another section of the mountain, and we encountered the volcanic ash and volcanic gravel. In fact, a lot of the gravel is crystallized in the shape of very unusual crystals, and the crystals would be 1.5 to 2 feet deep in places, and the trail went over this ash and crystals. And it was very hard climbing because you could take 2 steps forward and slide 1 foot back, take 3 steps forward and slide 2 feet back. And so the trail was just a series of 100 switchbacks, just like the shape of an S, back and forth, up the mountain at a very gradual angle because of the material that we were walking on. It was very strenuous and very challenging. In fact, by the time we reached the top of that section, it was like we had climbed it 3 times because of the way that our feet kept slipping back. And several of us fell. We fell often because of the rough terrain. You know, they say that no mountain climb is smooth. In fact, you couldn't climb a smooth mountain. If you tried to climb a smooth mountain, you wouldn't have any traction. And so mountain climbing is done on rough mountains, and very similar to your life and my life. Our lives often have rough spots, rough times, rough challenges. And that's the way life is on planet Earth. And God gets us through it. And so frequently we fell. By the time we got to the end of the 3rd day, our jeans were ripped and torn from the falls, and our knees were bloodied and scratched and bruised. It was very challenging to fall and get up again and keep falling. There's a beautiful verse that I want to share that goes with this. It's in Psalms chapter 24, Psalm 24 and verse 16. It's one of my favorite verses. I've turned to it many times. That's Proverbs 24:16. It's Proverbs 24:16. I'm sure many of you have read this verse and found it reassuring. Proverbs 24 and verse 16. It says this: "For a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again, but the wicked shall fall into mischief." So the righteous man, the writer says, the righteous man falls 7 times and rises up again. What a beautiful verse, what a reassuring verse for us in our life experiences. And it's interesting that on Kilimanjaro, every year they have 30 deaths as a result of falling. The climber loses their footing and falls and does not survive 30 times each year. Next, we climbed above the tree line. Above the tree line, there are no trees. There are just shrubs and grass, small vegetation. And the air is thin. There's very little oxygen. So there's not enough oxygen to support large trees. The air is thin because of the high altitude. It's interesting that the eagle is known for flying at high altitudes. What's interesting is in the United States Air Force, they require the Air Force pilots to use oxygen masks at 10,000 feet and above. Kilimanjaro was 20,000 feet, and we used no oxygen tanks. We just had to acclimatize. We had to learn to breathe deep because the air was thin and breathing was very challenging. And I'd like us to look at Isaiah 40, verse 31. Isaiah 40, verse 31. And it says this, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Do you know that they have actually seen eagles flying, soaring above Mount Everest? Mount Everest is almost 30,000 feet high. And climbers that climb Mount Everest usually use oxygen tanks. There have been a few climbers that have been able to do it without oxygen. But imagine, in the Air Force, pilots have to use oxygen tanks above 10,000 feet. And so once we ascended above 10,000 feet, it was very challenging. The air was thin, and breathing was very labored and tiresome. It's interesting that they say that about 13 people die a year on Kilimanjaro because of lack of oxygen, because of breathing problems in the thin air. Mount Kilimanjaro is 19,341 feet high. And in fact, it is so high that when you first drive up to the mountain, you look and you think, where's the mountain? The top is up in the clouds. And you mistake the snow-covered top of Kilimanjaro for clouds. In fact, often there's a cloud bank all across the rainforest, and then there's this detached summit of the mountain above the clouds. It's quite a scene to behold, quite a scene to look at. Another one of the challenges, in addition to falling and thin air, lack of oxygen, is the cold. The average temperature on Mount Kilimanjaro is 20 degrees during the daytime and minus 20 at night. And so it's right on the equator. The mission station where I lived was only 70 miles from the equator. And so we weren't used to the cold. We went from hot tropical weather to the top of Kilimanjaro in 5 days. And it was very challenging because of the cold. We took extra clothes. The last day and a half, we all wore 3 pairs of jeans, long johns, 4 pairs of socks, a shirt, an undershirt, a sweater, and a jacket, plus headgear. So we were trying to stay warm, but it was very challenging. In fact, the last night before the summit, we made it to a cabin. The Mountain Club of East Africa had built a cabin there, and we tried to sleep, but couldn't. We would keep waking up every 15 or 20 minutes because of the severe cold. We just couldn't get warm. Even though our sleeping bags were thick and heavy to carry, they did a poor job of warming us. And it was just a terribly cold night. So we actually got up at 3:30 in the morning. We fixed some soup, and at 4:30 we started out on the last day of the climb. That's usually the way the climbers do it. They get an early start on the last day so that they can reach the summit and make it back down to the cabin the next night. And so we left at 4:30 and started out. Our objective was to reach the top of the mountain by sunrise, because they say the most beautiful sunrise you can ever imagine is from the summit of Kilimanjaro. Well, we didn't make it in time for sunrise. We missed that. But I want to share with you a verse that relates to the coldness that we experienced. It's in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. So turn with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And we'll look at verse 11. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 11 says this: "Again, if two lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone?" And so we tried to sleep close to each other. We'd move our sleeping bags next to each other and try to gain warmth from each other, as it suggests here in Ecclesiastes. We always had a partner with us. We tried to stay with a partner, and we tried to match the partners with climbing ability so that the one wouldn't hold the other back. When we reached the top, and there were only 4 of us out of 22, there were only 4 that reached the top the second time. The first time, none of us reached the top. But on the second climb, 4 of us did. But we made a fatal mistake. Our fatal mistake was we didn't turn back soon enough. You know, many mountain climbers have died on Mount Everest because they stayed at the top of the mountain too late in the day. And going down in the dark is a fatal recipe. And so we committed the same mistake. In fact, in our preparation for climbing Kilimanjaro, I spent over a year running. I ran at least 3 miles a day. As we got closer to the climb, it was 5 miles a day. And then in the last month, I was running 10 miles a day. And some of that I would run on a mountain trail, a hilly trail that was near Nairobi. And I would run up and down these hills, trying to prepare myself. And I also carried a heavy pack when I practiced. In addition to that, we climbed Mount Kenya, which is a beautiful mountain, not too far from Nairobi. It's 17,000 feet high, not quite as high as Kilimanjaro. But when we were on the mountain, we had one of the school teachers. I was 17 and in high school. One of the teachers was our chaperone, and it began to snow as we were going up Mount Kenya. And we thought, not a problem. It must be just a light snow. There must not be that much heavy snow on Mount Kenya because it's lower than Kilimanjaro. And so we thought we would continue. We changed our minds very suddenly when we realized that we couldn't see our footprints behind us. It was snowing so hard. It was a blizzard for Kenya. It was snowing so hard that it was covering our tracks just within 3 and 4 steps. So the teacher said, "We've got to go down." And we said, no, we can make it. He said, "We are going to go down. We must go down." And so we turned and obediently followed his instructions, his command. And we were fortunate in doing that because we could have been lost in the blizzard. We could have been lost all night on the mountain. We were not prepared to stay all night. It was just a day hike. And we didn't have anything to keep us warm, or we didn't have adequate food. It would have been a recipe for disaster. So our teacher was wise. And it's one of the rules of the mountain. There are rules in mountain climbing. Don't leave late. You leave to go down early enough so that you can make it to the cabin. Stay with a partner, and making sure that you have first aid supplies and food supplies. These are rules of the mountain, and also preparation by being fit and in tune for mountain climbing. So we reached the top, 4 of us did, and then we began our descent. Do you know that most fatalities in mountain climbing occur in the descent? going down the mountain, not going up. Part of the reason may be because going down is much faster. In fact, climbing Mount Everest takes 6 weeks going up and 2.5 days going down. It's unbelievable how quickly they can descend. But because of that speed, there are often accidents. There are often falls. There are deaths by falls, death by the cold. There are even deaths because of the thin oxygen, the thin air. And so as we began our way down the mountain, there was a teacher with us from the school. I was still 17. There was another climber that was 17 with us, and one that was 15 with us. The 15-year-old had not trained. He had not prepared. He was not in shape or fit for climbing and was a bit on the young side. And so he started to lag behind the group. The teacher very wisely and quickly said to me, he said, "You need to go down while it's daylight, get to the cabin, and tell them that we're lost on the mountain." So the teacher and 2 students were so exhausted they could hardly put one foot in front of the other. They were moaning with each step, groaning as they went down, and the teacher trying to encourage them and keep pushing them down. So I followed the instructions and I started running down the mountain. The sun started to set and it got darker and darker. Dusk set in. And then just as it got dark, I could see the roof of the cabin. We had headlight lamps. We had headlamps, but the batteries had gone dead because we'd used them for about 4 or 5 hours that morning. And so the light was of no use. But I saw the cabin just as the last light of the day faded and it went dark. As I got to the cabin, I discovered that 2 or 3 groups had gone out looking for us. They were out on a ridge shouting and whistling, trying to get the attention of the other 3, but they couldn't find them. Other groups went the other direction, hoping to find them on another trail, and they were not found. We spent the night up in the cabin, with some going out every few minutes, calling, hoping to at least give a sound signal so that they would know the direction to come. But they had long before stopped for the night. They found a large boulder and they huddled together, the 3 of them, just as close and tight as they could behind this boulder. And they kept each other warm. The teacher stayed awake all night and was talking to the 2 students, trying to keep them from going to sleep and passing out because of the thin oxygen. Finally, sunrise came and we were able to meet them halfway. In the light of sunrise, they started walking, and they were walking the trail toward the cabin. And the folks from the cabin were walking out to meet them, and they finally found them and heard the story of this crazy night out on Mount Kilimanjaro in the cold with nothing to keep warm. It was quite an experience. In fact, one person who's a writer who climbed Kilimanjaro called it the greatest adventure of his life. And I would have to say that it was definitely one of the top 3 adventures of my life. It's interesting that going down the mountain climbers had learned something very fun, and that was to just sit down in the snow. And this mountain was so steep, and there were no rocks or boulders in that area, so they could just sit down in the snow and just slide to the end of the snow. And we did that, and we actually worked up quite a speed going down that steep mountain. There were no turns, and the snow, because of all the climbers sliding down, the snow had been packed in sort of a trench, sort of a trough. And so you could sit in that trough and just slide down at quite a speed. In fact, we were going so fast that it wore the bottom out of 3 pairs of jeans. And in fact, we couldn't stop. At the end of the snow, you couldn't stop. You were going too fast. And so you just kept sliding over the gravel and the lava ash. But it was all good fun. And we got replacement jeans pretty soon. So many lessons can be learned from climbing mountains, and I learned many lessons from climbing Kilimanjaro. One was, don't leave late. We left late. The lesson we learned on Mount Kenya, we violated on Mount Kilimanjaro. We stayed on the mountain too late in the day, and they weren't able to get back to the cabin. Another rule of the mountain is prepare. Prepare and train. Train and prepare. In fact, there's one mountain guide for Mount Everest who lives in Seattle, Washington. You know what he does to train and prepare? He gets permission from one of the city's tallest skyscrapers, and he runs up the stairway in this skyscraper. He runs several times a day, day after day, up those stairs, conditioning himself for the climb on Mount Everest. And so much work, much effort needs to be put into the preparation and training. The cold slows the climbers. The exhaustion slows the climbers. And the high altitude causes confusion. And not only confusion, but disorientation. And we had that happen with 2 of our group. They thought they were falling off the mountain. And they were screaming and crying, sitting on a rock, and they were saying they were falling. They were disoriented and delirious because of the low oxygen. Yes, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro was a great adventure. It was great to reach the top of Africa. I'll never forget it. Mountain climbing can be compared to the spiritual life in many ways. There's many spiritual lessons that we can draw from mountain climbing. We must follow the rules in our Christian experience. On the mountain, you had to be hydrated. You had to have plenty of water. You had to carry water so that you wouldn't become dehydrated. And we as Christians need the water of life. We need Jesus, the water of life, every day in our walk with him. Not only that, but we need to learn to pace ourselves. The climbers that started out too fast didn't make it. They wore themselves out. You have to pace yourself. And in the Christian experience, we must pace ourselves as well. We must leave on time. And we can apply that to our Christian experience also, that we must spend time with God each day. It's so easy to get up in the morning and rush out the door and say, I don't have time. We've got to slow down, pace ourselves, and spend time with Jesus. Get up a little earlier so that we have time with Jesus. And then there's the guide. We had a guide on Kilimanjaro. We have a guide in our Christian experience, and that's Jesus. Jesus is our guide. And we need to keep our eyes on the guide, keep our eyes on Jesus, and never lose sight of Jesus. It's fascinating that Ellen White had a dream of climbing a mountain. Let me share with you, it's very brief. Over 100 years ago, God gave Ellen White a dream. In the dream, she was traveling with a large group of people. Some of the people had their wagons loaded with all their belongings. The road they were traveling on was steep, and on one side was a big drop-off, and on the other side was a high white wall. So get the picture. High white wall on this side. On the other side, a precipice, a drop-off, a cliff that went straight down. The road got narrower and narrower, so they had to leave their wagons behind because there was no room, not room enough on the road for the wagons. Some of the people tied their luggage onto their horses and rode the horses. The path kept getting more narrow, so the people were all crowded near the wall. When their luggage hit the wall, they would sway toward the edge of the precipice. They were afraid they would fall off the edge, so they cut the luggage from the horses, and it fell off the side. When the road became so narrow that they were afraid they would lose their balance, they got off the horses. Finally, they left their horses behind and followed each other, walking in each other's footsteps. You know, you're leaving footsteps for others to follow. We are. Finally, they left their horses behind and followed each other, walking in each other's footsteps. Just then, small white ropes came down from the wall above, and they grabbed these white ropes, and they used them to keep their balance. The ropes moved along at the pace they were walking. Finally, the path became so narrow that they had to take off their shoes and eventually their socks. Even then, it was difficult to stay on the narrow and dangerous path. Many people who were not used to such hard traveling had already stopped climbing. These are the ones that didn't prepare, that weren't in tune for this strenuous experience. And the way we prepare is by knowing Jesus. We prepare by spending time with Jesus in the Bible and in prayer. Many people who were not used to such hard traveling had already stopped climbing. There were many on Kilimanjaro that turned back. There were 18 that didn't make it. Only 4 of us made it because they weren't prepared. But the people who were used to things being hard kept on traveling and wanted to reach the end of the road. Because the road became so narrow, they could not walk on it. They had to hold on tight to the ropes, saying, "We have to hold on from above. We have to hold on from above." And so they held the white cords. Each person said these words, "We have to hold on from above," to the next person on the path. And the message was passed from person to person down the line, down the mountain. We have to hold on from above. Suddenly, the people on the path stopped. They could hear all kinds of noises from below. Below the cliff, they heard naughty words, bad music, loud laughing, and also loud crying. The people holding on to the ropes on the wall were more determined than ever to keep going up the mountain path. The ropes got bigger and stronger in diameter. In the dream, Ellen saw that the white wall had blood on it. It made her sad to see the beautiful white stained with red blood. Then she realized that when people came up the path and saw the stains of blood, they would know that others had been there before them. And even though they suffered a lot of pain, they had kept on going up the path And so they gained encouragement from the bloodstains on the wall. It represented those that had been before and that had kept on going. This would encourage them to keep going also. Now, the people came to a big cliff below them, and the path ended. There wasn't anywhere to put their feet. They must trust the ropes, which had become very thick. Some of the people wondered where the ropes came from and what was holding them. Then in her dream, Ellen White looked across to the other side from the cliff and saw a beautiful field of green grass about 6 inches high. She could not see the sun, but bright beams of light like fine gold and silver rested on the field. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen on earth. But would they reach the field? Would they? What if the ropes broke? Again, the people whispered the words, "What holds the ropes?" Then someone said, "Our only hope is to trust in Jesus." Amen. Our only hope is to trust in Jesus. The ropes have held us safely all this way. They will still hold us. While they were waiting, they heard the words, "God holds the ropes." Oh, God is holding us, brothers and sisters. God is holding us. God holds the ropes. We need not fear. Then Ellen's husband, James White, swung himself over the cliff and landed in the beautiful green field. Ellen then took the rope and swung across also. Then the rest of the people did the same. They felt so relieved and happy and thankful. They then sang a beautiful song to God. Many times, James and Ellen White had hard times, but then they would remember the dream. They would remember the dream that God gave Ellen and ask God to be with them and help them till the end. Remember that we too are traveling to a beautiful place. And if, like the people in her dream, we hold on to the ropes of faith, the ropes represent faith. If we will hold on to the ropes of faith, we will be carried safely to God's heavenly home. I want to be in that heavenly home, don't you? I want to hold on to faith until we reach there, don't you? I want to be in that group that makes it to that beautiful land. There's a special message to us in the first book of Peter. Turn with me to 1 Peter, and we'll look at chapter 5 and verse 4. 1 Peter 5:4, it says, "And when the chief shepherd shall appear, ye shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away." Some of you have heard me tell that the 4 of us who made it to the top of Kilimanjaro were given a crown of everlasting flowers that was made by the guide and the porters. They picked the everlasting flowers high on the meadow, on the saddle at Kilimanjaro. There was a field of everlasting flowers. They picked them, and when they got down ahead of us, they were more fit than we were. They made these crowns of everlasting flowers. I still have mine. It's been 54 years, and I still have it. And it still has color in the blossoms. They are everlasting flowers. When the chief shepherd shall appear, we shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away. We must keep our eyes on Jesus. We must hold on to faith, the cord of faith. We must keep looking up. We must keep looking up. We must Surrender all to Jesus. Faith means that we surrender everything that we have and everything that we are to Jesus. If you are on a mountain today, if you are facing a mountain of any kind, hold on from above. Hold on from above. They repeated twice. Hold your faith. Keep your eyes on Jesus. If you're on a steep mountain today, remember Matthew 17. Matthew 17, verses 20 and 21 that Galen read this morning. Matthew 17, 20 and 21. And Jesus said unto them, because of your unbelief, for verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Howbeit this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. I pray that we will each have the experience described here in Matthew, that we will be able to move mountains of difficulties, mountains of challenge, mountains of testing that we may go through. Every person experiences a mountain sometime. Turn it into a spiritual mountain and keep your eyes on Jesus, and he will get us through. He will make us victorious on the mountain of life. Hiram, come up here. I've got to give this to you up here, so come on up. Did you hear the sermon today about Kilimanjaro? Yeah. You were listening? All right. Here is a t-shirt that says Mount Kilimanjaro, Tanzania, Africa. And there's a picture of Mount Kilimanjaro. It almost looks like that picture, doesn't it? Yeah. And I ordered this from Africa. They shipped it just for you. So this is for you to remember that life is a mountain, but God is there. Hold on to him no matter what. Hold on to him always, and you will be victorious, just like some of us were on the mountain. Enjoy wearing it. Enjoy it. May God bless us all.
Securely fold Jesus be.